and move straight on to welcome Nicholas Falk, our first and main speaker. Nicholas is an executive director of the URBED Trust and has developed the concept of Swift Rail. He's involved in and author of on sustainable planning and public transport. And he'll be talking about how transport can be part of a green recovery and how we can take that forward and put pressure on. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thank you very much. And can I say it's a great pleasure to be speaking to people who are really very close, but who I've been able to get to without having to travel by road or venture out on the railways, where it could have well taken me a couple of hours to reach the 30-mile distance between Stroud, where I live, and Bristol. And to my mind, the decline, by the way, you can hear me, I trust.
Yes.
Yeah. The decline in long distance travel, which could well be a permanent feature, reinforces the importance of suburban or local rail. It certainly provides the capacity, the space in the system to allow more short distance trains, stopping trains. But it also, I think, provides an impetus to raise new sources of finance to keep railways going. And the point about railways is not just that they provide a pleasanter, safer, healthier form of transport, but of course they have a reserved way, which means they don't suffer from congestion in the way that roads always will. And for those who say, oh, the answer is electric cars, autonomous cars, or whatever, I would point out that in the world we live in, there will still be congestion if everyone tries to jump in their car. So undoubtedly, we need to be thinking, as many other cities in other countries have done, of an integrated transport system. And that's what I'm really going to talk about today. And to share some experience, I want to take you out of the gloom and take you to a few other places. And I'm going to focus on money, which I think you'll find is rather important to improving system. So I'm sharing my screen at this moment. And you should now see the title of my talk this evening, Planning for Green Recovery. And you'll also see a cover of a report we published not so long ago through the Town and Country Planning Association, which shows the potential for tapping the uplift in land values that comes about when land is developed for housing. And you'll see on the left-hand side, the brown, which shows areas of relatively high potential, high land values, that Bristol comes within them. And so you are in the fortunate position, I mean, unfortunate if you're trying to buy a house, but fortunate position if you're trying to find new sources of finance, of having relatively high land values. And there is an opportunity, therefore. I also should perhaps say something about myself. I describe myself as an economist, an urbanist, a strategic planner. I set up URBED over 40 years ago. It stood originally for Urban and Economic Development, and the main office is in Manchester. So if nothing else, the company has survived for over 40 years, currently working on drawing up design guidance on design codes for the government, and a whole range of master planning work, mainly in the north of England. But for the last 30 years, at least, I've lived down in Stroud and done a lot of work in the southern part of the country. I'm going to say a little bit about why planning doesn't do better in the UK, show where money could come from, and then finally end up with the notion that Bristol is in an ideal position to adopt a green recovery plan. Why has planning lost its way in Britain? Well, it's because we react to developers' proposals. We don't start with a community or represented by local authorities conceiving a vision of what they want the place to become and then mobilizing resources. There's rarely an agreed or shared long-term vision. It's not made easier by the sort of punch and judy system of politics, particularly national politics, which means that whatever is set up by one government is then overturned by the following government. So there's little continuity. And that's made worse because of this strange division between development, particularly housing and infrastructure, which are planned in separate silos and not pulled together. And in my view, however wonderful the people might be in Westminster or in the City of London, it's quite impossible to join things up at that level. You have to learn from the rest of the world and have power devolve to the local level. And I think that's being appreciated with a lot of pressure for devolution, but that will only come about if we find new ways of resourcing local authorities. And that's the stress or focus of my presentation, because the resources available for investment are sadly lacking. We probably spend a third of investment that are in infrastructure that countries like Germany or France have been spending for years. So our infrastructure, and that's not just transport, but energy and water, are often worn out and overstretched. And the planning system is hard to understand, it's very complicated, and it's sort of underwhelming. I think, understandably, many people don't bother with it to get involved. This cover of a report we did for the Greater London Authority, Capital Gains, a Better London, a land assembly model for London, illustrates how London has grown over 100 years. And the dominoes are there to show that cities grow like dominoes. It's much more like a game of dominoes than it is a jigsaw puzzle. There's no preordained pattern, but on the whole, cities grow as their infrastructure allows. And you can plot the growth of London by understanding infrastructure and where investment has taken place. If we turn to a country which has done much better than Britain in linking up infrastructure and development, we could just take a trip to Paris. I've shown you here Jacques-Claude Bernard. ZAC stands for Zone d'Aménagement Concerté. It's a place for combining the management of different resources. And this is used extensively in France to pull together the development and transport. In this case, the high-speed suburban rail lines, the RER, the local lines, including a new tram. All of this is integrated with development to help pay for it. And this is in one of the poorest parts of northern Paris. And it's an absolutely exemplary project with a large retail centre you can see in the middle. And it seems to me that Bristol has the kinds of opportunities to tie together different activities, which at the moment are very divorced from each other. I was visiting professor at UWE, University of West of England. It just amazed me how that area is completely unjoined up, and how traffic dominates the M32 coming from places like Quedgeley, where there is no railway station, of course, adding to congestion and in the area around where the M5 and M32 meet the M4. So we can learn a lot from France. And we can learn a lot also from your general experience with land value capture. And this wonderful diagram comes from a book which is available freely, by the way, by Messrs. Suzuki et al. On financing transit-oriented development through land values. And I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, other than to say that there's a significant part of the increase in land value due to public investment in infrastructure, which should be captured or go to public service providers like transport undertakings to cover the costs of infrastructure and local service provision. There's something quite unfair about a system which is as kind of lottery, and whether you get any funding at all from central government, and where there's no method for joining up the investment that there might be taking place in a business park or major housing scheme and in transport. If any of you are interested in this subject and want to pursue it further, I produced quite a readable pamphlet for a thing called Urban Maestro on applying land value capture tools with case studies from Copenhagen and Freiburg. And I'm going to be returning to Copenhagen in a minute, both of which are similar in size and nature to Bristol. If we look at the subject of land value capture, you'll see that some of the best places have in fact used land value capture to fund infrastructure. Singapore is on the right, is one of the most successful city-states in terms of economic growth. It attracts people from all over the world because of its role as an innovation center. And the state has invested in really first-class public transport alongside new housing. But nearer to home, if you went across to Copenhagen, that's the bottom picture, you might be surprised if you went outside the old heart of Copenhagen to find this new town called URBED. That's on the way between the airport and Copenhagen, the historic center. It's only about 5 or 7 minutes from historic Copenhagen, 10, 15 minutes from the airport. And the point about this is not whether you like or don't like the architecture. The development was designed to fund the building of Copenhagen's first metro line, and subsequent developments are funding the second lines. And very interestingly, this starts with pooling all the public land. So instead of each under defense or health or whatever being seen as separate undertakings, all that public land is brought together, and then only then is it rezoned, and the uplift in land values is then used to borrow against in order to fund something like the metro here. And the results are to reduce sprawl and congestion and pollution, or to get what I call environmental balance, to boost productivity through economic growth, and to redistribute wealth, because it means you can provide housing for people on lower incomes. And the concept of all this, and the reason why Copenhagen outperforms Bristol, is that the whole, first of all, there is a spatial growth plan. It is based on the idea of building around green fingers, which provide also the transit corridors and development corridors between them, and rather than a green belt as in London on the left. So Copenhagen is regarded now as one of the world's most livable cities. Those of you who know it will say, well, it's jolly easy. It's got all lovely waterfront and so on. It has appalling weather much of the time, far worse than Bristol. And 30 or so years ago, the city almost went bankrupt because of the decline of industry. So it's gone through very similar problems, very similar climatic challenges to the UK, but it's followed a different approach to planning and development, which has got it out of their hole. Copenhagen's metro was funded by land value capture. Here you see one of the big new housing schemes. But the similar sort of thing is applied in Britain. We forget about this, but Docklands Light Railway was funded through the Development Corporation set up London Docklands. Here you can see Docklands Light Railway near the new London Airport, City London Airport. And in King's Cross, similarly, the land was pooled between the different public undertakings, the railways, and National Freight Corporation, before finding a development partner. And essentially, in that case, the success is to do with linking the new development with the highly accessible location. And there's this wonderful book. By the way, you can get it for free. You don't have to pay anything. You can download it. So look for Mr. Suzuki's book. In England, we also have a history of garden cities. We pioneered the concept of garden cities back in 1900 or so, Ebenezer Howard, and this was followed in the English New Towns. And in a competition called the 2014 Wolfson Economic Essay, we won against myself and David Rudlin against some 270 other submissions for showing how to build what we called Ooster Garden City. On the left, you can see how we propose laying out a new extension. But the whole development is anchored on an integrated transit system we call the Oxford Metro. I think probably when we came up with this, I wasn't aware of the proposals for Bristol Metro, and you're probably far advanced. But I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, the idea is to concentrate growth and new housing around the existing and proposed transit lines. Secondly, that one starts the blue line with making more use of existing rail before one puts in this case, a tram. We're proposing, if any of you know Oxford, the short distance from Botley through to the station and the city centre, and then through to Headington. And then the yellow line is bus rapid transit on the upgraded A40. And then there may be further tram lines going north-south. But the whole point is that the metro is an integrated system, and that circle is an area of 10 kilometers from the center of Oxford. And we showed that it was possible to double the population of Oxford, to build the housing needed for that growth within that area without going into areas either that were floodplains or the areas of natural beauty. So if you try to do spatial planning, and it's not that hard, we just don't do it, then you can, if you look at the two things together, transport and development, and you look at the natural environment, you can come up with a spatial growth plan. And I'm sure the same can and probably has been done for Bristol. But there is a problem, and that is that our railway system is designed for long distance railway transport. And what I'm promoting is the idea of the railways also being used for short distance transport, as of course is the case in London or some cities like Newcastle or Glasgow. But on the whole, the railways concentrate on long distance trains because those are the ones that make most money and on freight. So the Swift Rail, which is a name taken from Germany, if you like, where they talk about Schnellbahn. Swift Rail, I think, is a rather nice name. And here you see the picture. We mocked up what a Swift Rail train might look like passing through Stroud with seagulls on it too. No, so Swifts, of course. And this is using old District Line stock, which has been re-engined by a company which was set up by the former chairman or chief executive of Chiltern Railways, and is now running, incidentally, on the Bletchley to Bedford service very successfully. So it would be running something like this on short distance local lines, focused on the smaller growth cities like Bristol. It's aimed at turn up and go, and you've talked about 15 minutes intervals. And of course, if the interval is only 15 minutes and you might only have to wait 7 minutes, then of course you don't need a timetable. And even if you did, you could look it up on your phone. So it becomes easy to use because the challenge is not appealing to those who haven't got a car, like myself at the moment, but to those who find it very easy to get in their car. And so it's got to be easy to use, frequent, reliable, and integrated with other forms of transport. We're proposing not tram trains, but meeting mainly network rail standards, not highway ones. Yes, something like this is lighter than heavy rail. It will accelerate faster and brake faster, but it won't be like a tram. And if you, however, I'm also, as of course Andrew Bruddock will be telling you, very keen on trams being used in this sort of city. And here's Grenoble, Oxford's twin city. It's a third of the size of Bristol, yet they took the decision to get traffic out of the centre. They wanted to improve their air quality. They wanted to attract science-based businesses. It's one of the major research centres in France. And as a result, it's a pleasure to wander around the city because you're not having to way through traffic or have large buses passing by. I meant say in Grenoble, if the air quality falls in the mountains, then they stop commercial vehicles coming in. If anyone's interested in public health, I really recommend looking at what Grenoble is doing, and do visit it. It's not very far from Lyon, and you can get a high-speed train there from Paris. And the tram system is not just about the centre of Grenoble. I think by now there are probably about 8 lines. So it takes you out to the suburbs, both disadvantaged areas, like in Bristol's case, South Bristol, or to wholly new suburbs, closer to the mountains. So if you go to the main railway station, what do you see? It's not like Bristol or Bristol Parkway, where you end up with just car parks or sort of underdeveloped space. You see a modern business centre, World Trade Centre, and the railways and the trams are integrated. Now, I ask myself, why is it that we don't draw more lessons from countries like France or Germany? And at this point, I'm going to reach the last of my slide and say just a little bit about another similar sized city, Freiburg, which in a book I wrote with Sir Peter Hall called Good Cities, Better Lives, we described as the city that did it all. I do recommend, if you're taking a holiday to try to look at transit systems, do go down to Freiburg, just beyond Karlsruhe in southwest France, because you'll see the most amazing thing. I know that Bristol was bombed heavily in the war, of course, as a reprisal to the bombing of German historic cities. But Freiburg was bombed completely in 1945. There was no military activity there, but anyway, we chose to bomb it, I suppose, because we could. And you'll see there was nothing left in the center but the church, the big church. And the whole center has been rebuilt. You would think you were in a historic town. So that in itself is an amazing achievement. The whole town is knitted together by trams. So it's a pleasure to walk around. But the new suburbs, Vauban and Rieselfeld, on the edge, 3,000 and 6,000 homes respectively, which will show you what the future could be like. That was done through taking hold of the land in the way I've said, borrowing the money to put in the basic infrastructure and then selling off plots to developers, particularly self-builders, incidentally, some 130, I think, small self-build groups. So there's a lot to be learned from Freiburg too. And the important thing is linking transport and development. So I'm wanting to finish by saying that I believe Bristol and all cities like Bristol, which have found that their centre is dying, that there's too much empty space and probably never be reused without real action. It's not going to happen because of the market, because people found it easy to shop online, and it will only recover because people want to go in and can get in easily. So I believe you need the 5 A's, and this comes from work I've done on town centres in the past for government. Vital and Viable Town Centres is the name of the report, with 5 main elements. And I start with action. You've got to make people believe that things are going to happen. So start by making the environment look welcoming and have events, festivals and so on to really treat the town rather like a theatre with scenes that are continually changing. But next, access or connectivity is crucial. And it should be easy to walk around without ever having a conflict with vehicles. I know it's very different when I've wandered in from Bristol Temple Meads or tried to find Temple Meads. It can be quite a mystery where it is. Brunel, of course, positioned it on the edge, but somehow the bit between has got lost, I suppose, through bombing. And I think I'm almost finished. So access of all kinds, start where it's easiest, not with the worst first. Attractions, you need a whole mix of activities, and they need to be, if you're improving transport, you need to look at the routes that link the attractions together. Amenity, the place needs to feel safe and welcoming, but above all, there needs to be agency, the capacity to join things up. And in this action plan I produced on reinventing town centres, you'll see I set out the kinds of actions required. Now, in my view, groups such as yours can be absolutely in the forefront of bringing together the kind of task forces that are required. There are members of the Academy of Urbanism, which I'm involved with. Indeed, George Ferguson, your former mayor, was instrumental in setting it up. So there are no shortage of great designers based, living and working in Bristol. And it seems to me the difficult thing is being able to overcome political allegiances and being able to pull everyone together, rather like it's like an orchestra where everyone full of experts in their instrument, but there's no agreed score. So someone has to do that, and I believe that score, that route map, if you like, is about the transport system. So I wish your concepts every success. I think one needs to intensify activities now, because it's not just about saving the planet and saving life on the planet by improving public health, but it's also breathing life back into the hearts of dying city centres. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. An interesting presentation with a lot of things for us to think about. I'm struck by the capacity to join things up, particularly, and wonder, you know, how that will happen locally. I'm going to ask Tim and Carol though if there are questions that they've got there.
Not seeing any at the moment. If you can either put your hand up electronically or physically, if you have anything.
Sue is saying that she wishes Marvin Rees was here tonight to see our presentation. So, but we have got it. We have got it recorded, so we can send it to Marvin if anybody can bring it to his attention.
Okay.
Hopefully as well. Sorry, hopefully as well, as the leader of North Somerset Council is one of our members, although he's not able to be here tonight, we could certainly draw his attention to it.
We have another question from Ben R, who is unmuted. What's your question, Ben?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so my name's Ben. I've been a town planner myself for about 10, 15 years, mainly in the west of England, where I spent most of my adult life. I've actually moved away for a few years to live with my wife in France, give that a go, but I'm hoping to move back to Bristol, which is why I'm on the call. I mean, I've sort of got a million questions, but I'll try and ask one that's relevant to the wider group. Of course, I agree with you. I mean, we don't really do planning in England or the UK more widely. We've basically got a consenting system. A developer, I mean, there are local plans, and I've been involved in a lot of strategic planning, structure planning right at the beginning of my career, and with the regional assembly very early on when those were a thing. And they don't really go anywhere. You know, they're done and they don't really go anywhere. At the end of the day, as a developer, they get a parcel of land, they apply for planning permission, they pay the Section 106 agreements or whatever else, and they build or they don't, depending on whether or not they get permission. So I suppose the question is, what level do you think is most appropriate for this vehicle? In looking at comparative planning systems, I mean, Denmark and the Netherlands and the Northern European countries, they tend to have quite consensus forms of government anyway. Certainly, I mean, my French is just about good enough now to sort of pay attention to what goes on, and they do tend to just force things through here. So I suppose it's about the balance between the very local, i.e. a village that doesn't want a TGV line going through it, and the strategic, the regional and the national interest, which would obviously benefit, I guess, HS2, but I mean, thinking about the west of England, the Bristol Metro, the Underground project, for example, you're going to have a lot of controversy about where those lines and where those stations go if it ever happens. So I suppose the question is, yeah, at what level do you do it? Do you do it at the West of England level or the district level or what?
Yes. Okay. Well, I suppose the simple answer is you have to operate at all levels, and the trick is to be able to link them up. And this requires leadership. And leadership is not just a question of listening to the loudest voices or following a referendum, as we stupidly did over Brexit, but rather it's about looking at the options, seeing what the implications are going to be, and then persuading people to do things they don't necessarily want. That's the role of a leader, to think long term. Now, it seems like we've suffered from a lack of local leadership, possibly because the local authorities have had their powers taken away from them. And it seems at the moment, at least, that we do probably need development corporations where you need to tie things together at a level of a part of a city centre. But I think the regional spatial plan has to be done at a sub-regional level. It may well be the sort of area that was covered by the former Avon, which I believe is now resurrected as Wacker, is it? Is probably the right kind of area, and that it is possible for people with different backgrounds, town and country, left and right and so on, to work together for a common vision if they believe that they face common challenges. So I would start with places which feel they have something in common. I personally believe that the Bristol travel to work area it should be seen as going up as far as Gloucester. So I'm glad you've discovered that, And I said, if Stroud is only 30 miles away, it must be the case that a number of people who live in Stroud district work in Bristol, and possibly even vice versa. So I would start by drawing up a strategic plan for that area. And I would do this not by just employing the world's greatest architect or some massive study which costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, but I think one can start by actually bringing together people in a visioning process, something that we did very successfully back in 1988 in Birmingham, the Hybrid Initiative, but which there are many other examples. So I think there is a value of starting with local people's concerns and getting their priorities. And funnily enough, the webinar process, the sort of thing we're engaged in, does allow you through the chat function to actually vote on priorities. We recently had amazingly an event in southern India which was coordinated by somebody in Hong Kong. We had people in Mumbai, Riyadh, as well as in Machynlleth in Eastern Wales, and in London, and southern India, of course, and that worked remarkably well. So I think we now have the tools to enable people to collaborate across boundaries and across different sectors if they are coordinated. But it does start with somebody wanting to do something and saying not just how can we solve today's problems, but what's the place going to be like in 30 years? What are the options for that? And what kind of place do we really need to have? So that would be my answer. Sorry, it's a bit long-winded, but it's a complex and important issue.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. I think that's probably where we kind of potentially fit in, and working with groups like the Transport for Greater Bristol Alliance and making ideas known